Thank you, Matthew. Good morning, budding researchers, doctorates, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, friends. I think the TV clip said it all in terms of youth, the opportunity, and as I was sitting there and Matthew was just narrating the track record of the other two gentlemen who were sharing the dais with me, I realized in a lighter sense that youth has its advantage. Right? When I compare myself to these two gentlemen, they are giants, phenomenal track record in terms of what they have done. But as a youth, I think I get the privilege of being first, youngsters first. So I come to make a small presentation on the topic. For sure, I think you would have gone through a lot of statistics yesterday, so I'm not going to bore you with that. But as I go through the presentation, I would touch upon a couple of them just to set the context, or just to reiterate a point. Okay? So I have 3 modules to walk you through. Keep it very crisp. Context in India, which I think the clip highlighted in a very clear manner. What are the demographic dynamics which underlay the demographic dynamics, which is the chugging engine, which is going to throw up a lot of challenges, and therefore in our perspective what we think could be the benefit for India if you are able to convert these into opportunities. So what's the context in India? Quick stats. I think all of you know. The demographic dividend is typically focused on the slice of population which is 20 to 30 age group. And in India, as statistics have been talking about it for the last 3-4 years, it's phenomenal in the sense that close to a third of them are under 15 years, so they are the future. What is even more compelling is that more than 50% are under 24 years. My subsequent slide will talk about why it is important, but if you look at the stats here in terms of the population, just observe how the bulge is, and the good part is that even as you look at the next 20-25 years, the bulge is still good for us, right? Because the people who are going to be 15 today are going to be in their prime working population even 15 years down the line, 20 years down the line. Why is it important? Now before that, I don't know how many of you all watched President Pranab Mukherjee's Republic Day speech. Like Matthew said, a quick show of hands, you did? I think there was one very compelling statement he made where it was a rallying cry to the youth saying, go ahead, complain, rebel and demand. Right? I think coming from an 80-year-old gentleman, it really sets the tone for saying that youth is the asset we have, youth is the asset we have to exploit, youth is the asset we have to nurture, and youth is the opportunity we have to convert India into what we think can be the leading economic force in the next 2 decades. So what are the dynamics which underlie demographics? Why are we talking of demographics? Why are we saying it's good when you're talking of that slice between 20 to 30? Fundamentally, it's got 2 benefits. Right? This population which gets into the mode of working, into the working life phase, they contribute to productivity and therefore to GDP growth. But interestingly, they're also going to be the consumers because they're going to have earning potential, they're going to have money in their hand. In a lighter note, you can understand, the boom in Bangalore. When ITEs came, we found how it's not just the cost of things which went up, but lifestyle itself went up. Youth indulging in eating out, indulging in leisure activities and so on, huge consumers. So you have a twin benefit of exploiting the demographic dividend. The other interesting thing, given that India is connected to the globe, a sneeze somewhere will create a cold somewhere is what somebody said. We are connected. We are connected quite inextricably to other economies, and therefore what is happening in the other countries also becomes an area of exploitation for us in a positive sense. If you look at the other countries, the old age bulge is catching up with them. So if you look at countries like Europe, Japan, and interestingly China as well, people are now starting to realize that the aged is going to become a big hangover for them. The youth will have to start supporting them, and none other than China has reversed its single child policy. They really want to keep that funnel and stream of youth coming into the economy, fundamentally because they need to be the supporters, not just for the present population, but for the elder population. And in a connected world, and with migration happening, with people moving about across boundaries, there's no reason why we can't exploit that in an extended sense as well. So having talked about the first two elements, what about converting the opportunity? So I know this is not a science forum, but let me just trigger your imagination. I think fundamentally it boils down to a simple equation of E is equal to mc squared, not Einstein. E here talks about employability. Okay? And how do we make it happen? What I believe are the fundamental structural changes which have to happen in those other elements which can give us the leapfrog benefit to exploit the youth. A very primary need, I think there is a realization that it is becoming important, that youth is critical. It goes away from the Malthusian theory where it said population is a bomb, as population explodes, you're going to have poverty and so on. That has been debunked. You can look at neighboring countries, so-called tiger of the 80s, Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, Malaysia, and more recently China. They've proven this to be completely wrong. So it's not that you have more population, then the economy is weighed down, you're going to drown. That's not the immediate logical reasoning or conclusion. Demography is an asset, right? I think that recognition has to come in, and it's nice to see that in many forums, I interact with government in some of the policy making bodies, people are realizing that it is an asset. I mean, that's the primary need, and then you start looking at how do you convert the challenges, how do you look at the opportunities, and how do you make them fructify. First, I'm talking in educational institutions, so you'll have to bear with me. Some of these sound very rudimentary, but from an outsider in the industry, I think this is something which we are experiencing when we employ people, when we educate, when we get guys on training and so on and so forth. But a quick snapshot on, this is not about statistics, but just to get a point going. Literacy, if you look at literacy, somebody said it's 60% plus. It's come a long way from 1950s, where it was just about 18%. That's good. If you look at the education delivery infrastructure, you have something close to 1.4 million schools. You have something like 700 plus universities and growing. You have something like 37,000 colleges. And some other dashboard parameters in terms of the quality which underlies it. What's the gross enrollment ratio? Right, I've only looked at secondary and higher. It's about 57%. Pupil teacher ratio, it's about 32. And our expenditure, public expenditure on education as a percentage of GDP is just about 4%. You peel the layer and you find that on higher education it's just about 0.6%. This is just to set the context. I'm not going to delve deep into this, but the journey we have done from our independence seems to be positive, seems to be good, but then where are we faltering, right? If you look at the gross enrollment ratio and you look at countries which have done well, the advanced countries, the developed economies, some in the neighboring Asian countries as well, it hovers anywhere in the 70 to 90 band, right? Which obviously means that you're getting the stickiness of these students into the education stream better, and therefore it helps improve your supply side for employable youth coming out, right? That's one direction. Pupil teacher ratio, we talked about 32 for India. Again, if you look at success stories in West or in some of the developed markets in the East, it's about 15. I mean, it's a no-brainer to say that the smaller it is, the better individual attention a teacher is able to give to the student, and it translates into very robust, reliable, enduring youth who's knowledgeable when he comes out into the job market. Government expenditure, 4%. For a country as big as ours, it's very deceptive, but 4 is just not enough. It needs to be at least 6 and above. And there have been studies which say that for every 1% increase in higher education, there is a GDP increase of 0.11%. I mean, the multiplier benefit is as direct, as tangible, and as impactful as that. Second, again, this is something that I'm able to relate to when I get to interview guys coming from colleges, good reputed institutions as well. We need to make the education content course very contemporary and relevant for the current world, right? How can that happen? Unless there are strong linkages with industry, we find that there is a huge difference between what is theoretically taught in the schools and colleges and classrooms and discussion forums and what is practiced in the industry. So there is a real need for a strong handholding or handshake between the industry and educational institutions, which brings about hands-on experience to the extent they are primed when they get into the job market. And equally importantly, the government has a big role to play where it needs to make the policies easy for private sector investments. So I'll narrate some personal experiences which Matthew talked about. At Acer, we do a lot of projects both in the consumer space and commercial space. He did talk about retail, which I'll come to later. But in the commercial space, we have government as one of our largest customers, and in that, e-governance projects and education is one big slice. They go under the name of ICT projects. About 4 years back, it was identified as a very good area for investment because you're enabling, providing the infrastructure to make education very immersive. Right? And we have done a lot of projects across states, whether it's Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, UP, AP, Kerala, Goa, Northeast. These are some of the forward-looking states. Somewhere in the policy, and you will find it very amusing when I say this, somewhere in the policy there are terms and conditions which makes it completely self-defeating, right? What do I mean by that? They talk of these projects as a 5-year project where these technology gadgets, the typical life is not more than 3 years. The rule book says that it has to have warranty support for 5 years. That's a small example. Second, many of the system integration partners who have got engaged in doing this, names like NIT earlier, now they moved out, and that's one of the reasons they moved out, is fundamentally because they did not find it worth the while to get engaged in the space. You have Educom, Beveron, and big names like that. They found that in a business like this, cash flow is very important, right? So payment cycles have to be it has to be honored as per the tender requirement, and if it falters even 1 or 2 cycles, they're just not able to keep their infrastructure in these schools up and running, whether it's projectors, computers up and running, or trained staff. They're just not able to keep it up and running, right? So there has to be a lot of tightness when you look at a project execution of this scale, and SLAs, service level agreements, has to work both ways, both from the supplier of the solution, which is the private sector, and from the government or the consuming entity, which could be a state government or a central government, to ensure that the commitments are honored in terms of payment cycles and the time slice is reduced to a more reasonable 3 years. Because after 3 years, you try to support a desktop or a notebook, technology has moved on, and you won't even get the spare part or a motherboard. Right? So these are nitty-gritties. I just thought I'll mention that. They have been game changers in some of the states where they have been forward-looking, and they have seen merit in the industry making a representation or a feedback saying you tighten this, have SLAs and so on. They have been able to do it. So now you have year after year Goa and Northeast Assam indulging in this project, and both the sides are happy, right? So that's just an example. So from the education perspective, to summarize, what needs to be done between the private sector, the industry, the technology guys, and the government and other stakeholders is to improve access, which can happen through improving your enrollment and the stickiness of student community in the education stream. Equity, make it available to all. I mean, this is where a revolutionary thing like MOOC, I don't know why it can't be adopted, massively online, open online courses can be adopted, right? You get the best of technology with digital connectivity going up, you have 4G around the corner, Wi-Fi in some smart cities coming up, and so on and so forth. There's no reason why it has to be tiered or why it has to be calibrated. You know, it can be a rich man's son or a person who's a laborer. Their kids can definitely get to access the same content, same quality content, without any differential pricing and quality of education. Second part, in how do we convert this opportunity, is all about manufacturing. Again, a bit of statistics just to set the context. If you look at the GDP contribution between agriculture, services and industry, services weighs heavily, which is at about 57%, and it's been growing at a galloping speed, and that's where your IT is success story blends into. But if you look at labor employment, you would find that it's just 31%. Don't forget that India is still an agrarian country. You know, close to 50% of the labor is still there in the hinterland, and unless you get them into the fold, and you get them into the fold by getting them into the industry, which can only come about by manufacturing, it's not about services, the dreaded demography dividend can become a disaster, can blow up in your face. And that's where manufacturing comes into play. It's quite lopsided. If you were to compare it to some of our neighboring Asian economies, industry kicks in somewhere between 35 to 50%. Strong, robust, genuine manufacturing is happening there. And that's what gives you a constant stream of design innovation, R&D, developmental work coming in. Not to say that services is not important, but services, I would say, in a very lighter sense, is very shallow. It really doesn't understand and go into the depth of what the economy requires. You need to have a very strong, robust pillar in manufacturing. And what is required here? Enabling government policies. It's heartening to note that the current government has understood the need for manufacturing. So we have all these initiatives of Make in India, Digital India, Startup India, right? But just focusing on Make in India, it's a right direction, it's a right thrust. Only thing that needs to be done to translate into reality is get all the policy cobwebs cleaned up. I'm part of an executive council member in MATE, which is Manufacturers Association to Information Technology, where we get to interact with many government entities and policy making bodies in terms of talking about what is real in the industry. We have a view of what is happening globally, right? Thanks to our connection with our headquarters and other entities across the globe, and we are able to bring some of those learnings, some of those practices, some of those benefits in terms of policy measures as an articulation to these bodies. And right now, when we talk of IT, I'll only talk of IT, which is my specialty, there is a urgent need for getting into manufacturing. I mean, there have been statistics which say that while today our largest import bill is petroleum, in time, it's going to be electronics, and it's going to be upward of 400 billion US dollars. That's going to be the kind of requirement for just getting these gadgets, whether it's a projector or a mobile phone or a notebook and so on. If we don't start manufacturing in India, year after year, you'll have to start paying that kind of a bill into importing these products. So the need is right. However, when we interact with the government, I think somewhere there is a gap in understanding of the need for a long runway. Right? A plane can't take off just like that. It's not an helicopter. So we have said you need to have some supportive policies for a phased manufacturing program. Right? It gives time for technology absorption, and the parallel we draw is with the automobile industry. Very clearly it was well done. There was a PMP where all the components started getting manufactured, and then the entire ecosystem was strong for automobile manufacturers to come in. And today, I mean, we can proudly say that the best of East and West automobile manufacturers are there, whether it's German, whether it's US, whether it's Korea, whether it's Japan, they have their footprint here in terms of local manufacturing. So that's one translation of policy which has to be done properly. And equally importantly is labor reforms. Right? Somewhere there was a statistic which said there are about 50 plus 180 statutes between central and state. If one has to meander through all the sensitive elements for labor, for handling the labor as an organization. Right? I mean, that just will not work in a world today where you have to move fast. Right? So that's one element on enabling. And we have calculated, I'm specifically talking about IT, what the disablement cost is today if we were to look at Made in India to be fast tracked within 6 months, which is impossible. You know, that's the current thinking, where we have said we need a long runway of at least 3 years. The disablement cost is something like 20%. Right? If you have a notebook, you knock it down into components, get it as components and start assembling, and then start getting into manufacturing. Even the first phase, where you knock it down into smaller pieces, get it here, assemble, test and ship it out, the disablement cost is about 20%. So obviously for a customer, we can't charge that much more. So why would anybody want to import it in a knockdown condition, assemble it just for the sake of adhering to the Make in India part and make it costlier for the Indian consumer, right? So I hope the context is clear. All we are saying is Make in India is important, manufacturing is important, but it has to be phased out in a reasonable time frame so technology absorption can happen. When you talk of manufacturing techniques, it's going up by leaps and bounds. I remember the time when I was in college where we used to go to lathes and milling machines and so on. Today you have many of them automated. You need to have just one or two guys running an army of such CNC machines and milling machines and manufacturing machines, which are the size of at least 4 times the size of this room, right? Just about 2 or 3 people doing it. So people have to be geared to jump into the bandwagon of understanding what this is and scale up. And this is where education industry interface is very critical, right? Even today in many of the colleges, people get to learn what is 15, 18, 20 years old, and it takes a lot of time for the industry to kind of retool them, re-educate them. First they have to unlearn what they've learned and then get back into the mode of understanding what is contemporary, what is relevant for the industry today. Third element, when we talk of manufacturing, it's again not limited only to the metros, not to the top 8 or 10 or 20 cities. There's a huge potential in the hinterland. I'll give an example. What needs to get it happening to chugging along is right infusion of design and technology. And one example where I was personally involved was, we were working with NID, National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad, for some program to engage with the youth and so on and so forth. And it was an eye-opener to us when we went there and found the kind of work they have done. And you should go to their website and see what they have done. I'll just give you 2 examples. A person who's got his leg operated, right, fracture operated and so on, he uses a 4-stick walker. Just from understanding the need point of view, the students there have designed a walker where it can be used for a person to climb the stairs as well. Nobody thought of it. So what do? The rear 2 prongs are fixed. The front 2 prongs are much like an automobile. You have a shock absorber. So it keeps moving up and down, and one is able to walk up the stairs in a home. Right? It is something very simple, but it's something very relevant for the market. And it's spawned off a small industry there. Similarly, there have been examples of cycles in remote areas where India is a monsoon country. You don't know when water will come, and when you'll have to traverse tracks of water. There has been a nice innovative design there where the cycle actually transforms into a kind of a mini boat, even through pedaling. Some of you might have seen it, some examples of that in some TV clips. Again, it's so useful, so relevant, so germane to the real need. And there are small entrepreneurs there around those villages who are manufacturing that retrofitting gear to make a cycle into a small paddle kind of thing to go across small lakes or small pools of water. Third element, converting the opportunity. This is where skills really come in. I'll try to also mention about our experience in the retail part, but the sheer statistics here is mind-boggling. It's staggering. Every year, close to 10 to 11 million graduating students come out. That's the supply side. That's what gets pumped out from the education stream. And studies have shown that hardly 20% of them are those who are really ready to get absorbed into the industry. What does it mean for companies who are employing? Companies are there for answering their stakeholders. It's not about making profits, but if there are entrepreneurs who have invested in the company, you need to ensure that the company makes a profit, you reinvest and you grow. But there's a huge wastage which happens for the companies to get these guys retooled. A lot of time is spent, a lot of resources is spent to get these guys into ship shape, to fit into the groove as relevant for the industry. Right? So that's one element. And second, somebody talked about gender diversity. Even in India, the women folks form just about 20% of the workforce. They can really be fruitfully engaged. If I were to look at, again, the IT sector, electronic sector, and if I look at Taiwan, look at China, look at Vietnam, some of these areas where they've gone into a lot of electronic manufacturing, you find huge factories, 90% of them are only the women folk. Right? Because it's about their nimble-handedness, their attention to detail, of assembling small components, small elements, getting them prefixed, etc., etc. There's a huge potential in India. When you talk of digital India, you talk of India manufacturing, including IT products. This untapped potential can easily come into the mainstream and help boost employability quotient. Okay. Another flavor of this coaching part is vocational training, which is something which we are blind to in India. Somewhere a statistic said that hardly 2% of our workable employees or people who come into the job market have gone through a real solid vocational training program. Compared to Germany, which is, I'm told, is ahead of the curve, and even in US, UK and Japan, close to 60% of the people who come into the workforce are those who have actually tainted their hands with real workshop experience or real hands-on experience in the industry through vocational training. I think that's something which bears a lot of focus and attention and resources because you're priming them to be ready when they get into the real world. And ITIs, there are about 7,000 of them. unfortunately, despite a lot of focus from the government, they are languishing. The infrastructure is there. I think with some single-minded focus, they can be refurbished. As per the policy, there is a scope for corporates to adopt it, but I think those linkages have to be much stronger, much more business-friendly. That again is an infrastructure which can be leveraged to get into vocational training as a tool, as an instrument, as a process to get the handshake much stronger. So I'll come to my penultimate slide. So converting the opportunity, E is equal to MC squared. Talked about employability, which is a core need for tapping the digital dividend, the demographic dividend we have. And it translates into manufacturing, which has a strong linkage for job creation. Contemporaneous in education, right, is another crying need, and coaching is extremely important. So I'll pause here and talk about the coaching part in the retail arena which I talked about. See, when we came into India, we were the last entrant into PC business. We had the IBMs earlier, we had HP earlier, we had Dell through HCL earlier, Lenovo was much later. It's a transformation of IBM. And as a company from the Far East, we are very strongly rooted on Oriental values. What do I mean by that? It's not about investing for the first 3 years, run it at a loss, and then start reaping your benefits. That's not the philosophy with which Acer runs. To the extent that Acer has a global federal structure where each in-country entity is called a national subsidiary. So much like Acer India, there are about 70 odd Acer entities across the globe, like Acer Malaysia, Acer Singapore, XYZ. Each have to stand up on their own, right? So I'm just dwelling on this to say that whatever we had to do it in a manner where we don't drain, we don't bleed, we don't invest money and say that we'll recoup it after 3 years. And we realized that when we came to the country, which was in 1999, we realized that India was prime ready for a mobile device. And I'm not talking of smartphones. It was not the era of smartphones. I'm talking of notebooks. And that was a time when notebooks used to cost close to $1 lakh. Right? So given our strong manufacturing backward linkages in China, and given our understanding of the market need, we came out with a notebook where just before the budget day, it was educated guess, much like Mr. Shastri talked about Bihar winning the election. We also made an educated guess saying the duty rates are going to come down, and we announced a price of 29,999. And that really opened up the market. And since it was still a new product, we said we need to have the benefit of a retail touch point for consumers in the vastness of India. And what we did in retail was, we said we'll come out with a philosophy or a strategy where we won't go about advertising, we won't go about with TV commercials, but rather we will be present in each of those locations in a retail store. That's where customers can come in, experience and feel and touch the product. And for the first time in the industry, we came out with a one-page MOU where we engaged with prospective entrepreneurs, people who are traders. We engaged with them, got some science into it to say that is this outlet retail friendly? Is it in a prime spot? Are footfalls naturally coming in there? Does the guy have the orientation for customer service? And had this one-page MOU with about 150 potential retail outlets. And very quickly, within 3 months, we were able to get our product close to the customer. Right? So that's what we did. In terms of skilling, obviously these are not the best of guys to give a retail experience. I'm talking of 2000, 2001, 2002, where the mall culture was not there. Hypermarts were not the concept. We came out with a concept where we said we'll give a unique identity, consistent identity to Acer outlets, and we call it Acer Mall, not to be confused with the 20,000 square foot shop. Those days we call it a mall, and we went and recruited in-store promoters where they underwent a training by the company people on soft skills. Right? Many of these guys were quite nerdy in terms of saying, I need a 500 GB hard disk, I need processor speed, all this. But when it came to understanding the customer's requirements, sizing him, profiling him, understanding his mood, and therefore suggesting in a very non-intrusive way what is ideal for him, there were a lot of soft skills we had to impart. And that was a huge learning. Right? Guys didn't know that they had to be dressed properly, greet them properly. These are basics. In a very simple way, when we go back to our family roots, these are done things, right? Saying thank you, greeting somebody and so on. But somehow that was a big distance in the technology world when people were asked to do some retail selling. So that was a huge gap we bridged through consistent skill training. And to cut the long story short, that has evolved over time to be in pace with what the market requires. To cut to today, we have all these guys equipped with a mobile app where whatever is a product knowledge, whatever is a product feature set, it is pumped centrally from a server into each of these mobiles like an app. And when a customer comes in, he is able to actually walk him through the product, right? The other benefit is in this, in any service sector for that matter, churn is always a constant challenge. The guy is there with you for 10 days, 12 days, sorry, 10 months, 12 months, and somebody finds him to be very good, very well trained, he offers him 1,000 rupees more and he moves lock, stock and barrel to the other guy. You can't get this guy to be retrained all the way. So we find that this digital solution of getting the product knowledge consistently, reliably, 24/7 round the clock is helping us tide over this challenge of churn. Right? One last point, hope I'm doing well on time. Yeah, so I'll just finish it. So Bangladesh, Bhutan, you wanted me to touch a point. While they are a neighboring country, there was a huge sea of difference between the skill sets available there and in India. And given our Indian success, we tried to transplant it there. It did not work because there's a lot of cultural differences. So it took us a lot of time to work with a local partner from a small thing like making it local in terms of language to understanding the cultural sensitivity there and then start orienting our retail selling skills there. Okay? So with E is equal to MC squared, we are set to really reap the digital dividend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rajendran. May I invite Dr. Shastri to please address the audience.